Hello, and welcome to another vlog. This past weekend, Nova Scotia and much of Atlantic Canada was hit by a wintry wallop, but I'm pleased to say that we made it through the storm unscathed. Anyway, this week's theme is antibiotics, and I thought I'd spend the duration of today's vlog talking a little bit about the proper use of antibiotics and the history of antibiotics. So, antibiotics are medications that are used to treat bacterial infections, and they really are our main defense against these kinds of infections. Unfortunately, due to the misuse of antibiotics, antibiotic-resistant bacteria are becoming much more common. Infections such as pneumonia and sexually transmitted infections that were once very easy to treat with antibiotics are becoming increasingly resistant, making them much more difficult to treat and causing a lot of problems for the medical community. Fortunately, there are some things that you can do to help combat the misuse of antibiotics. Now, the best thing that you can do to combat antibiotic-resistant bacteria is to not get sick. That means washing your hands and practicing good hygiene and staying up to date on your vaccines. That being said, no matter how many precautions you take, you still have the potential to get sick. So if you do get sick, which is likely, there are some things that you should remember. The first is to only use antibiotics when necessary and as directed by a medical professional. So you shouldn't use antibiotics to treat minor infections that are likely to clear up on their own because this is just unnecessary. And you shouldn't use them to treat viral or fungal infections because antibiotics specifically kill bacteria. They don't work on viruses or fungus. So using an antibiotic to treat those infections isn't going to do anything and it's pointless. And although these two things seem very harmless, they can cause more harm than good. It's because we've been exposing the same bacteria to the same antibiotics for such a long time that they've begun to evolve a resistance to some of our best medications. And the more we abuse antibiotics, the worse this problem is going to become. The second thing is that when you are prescribed an antibiotic, you should stick to the recommended dose and treatment regimen. So if your doctor tells you to take an antibiotic twice a day for a month, then you take that antibiotic twice a day for a month and you finish the prescription, even if your symptoms go away. Because just because your symptoms are gone doesn't necessarily mean the infection's gone. And if you don't finish your prescription, then all of those leftover bacteria can pass their resistance on to the next generation, which can then pass it on to their offspring, and so on and so forth, until eventually you have a strain of bacteria that's completely resistant to that particular antibiotic. And that's really what's been happening. That has been over the course of 5 or 6 decades has made antibiotic-resistant bacteria such a major problem. And the last thing is to not share antibiotics or use expired antibiotics, because not only can this reduce the effectiveness of those medications, it can also be dangerous. So that's just a brief look at some of the things that you can do to help combat antibiotic-resistant bacteria and fight the misuse of antibiotics. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of antibiotics. So antibiotics have been used to treat bacterial infections for thousands of years. Many ancient civilizations, such as the Egyptians, used antibiotics to treat all sorts of infections. But it wasn't until the 20th century that modern antibiotics became a thing. In 1909, a German physician by the name of Paul Ehrlich noticed that certain dyes colored some bacterial cells but not others, and he proposed that certain chemicals could be used to treat bacterial infections without harming surrounding cells. And that same year he isolated a chemical that could be used to treat syphilis, which was a very common illness at the time that caused a lot of problems. But this wasn't really a true antibiotic, and it had a lot of nasty side effects. It wasn't until 1928 that true antibiotics were discovered when Sir Alexander Flemming discovered penicillin when it contaminated a sample of Staphylococcus bacteria that he had in his lab. And then he did more testing and found out that penicillin was indeed an effective antibiotic. And, Sir Alexander Flemming and a lot of the people in the medical community knew about the existence of antibiotics, but they didn't know a lot about them. Anyway, it wasn't until the 1940s, during World War II, when antibiotics really started to gain popularity. And it was around this time that they started mass producing them to support the war effort. And then in 1945, Sir Alexander Flemming and the two men who helped to mass produce the antibiotic received the Nobel Prize for medicine for their discovery. And antibiotics really continued to gain popularity from there. Fast forward to the present day, 2019, and antibiotics are our main defense against bacterial infections, and like I mentioned, antibiotic resistance is becoming a serious problem. Fortunately, there are a lot of treatments in the works to replace antibiotics, such as phage therapy and fecal transplants, and a lot of these treatments hold a lot of potential, so there is still hope. Anyway, that's just a brief overview of the history of antibiotics. Just kind of wanted to talk about it a little bit. Thought it would be a nice way to end the episode. Anyway, on Thursday, I'll be releasing a video in which I talk more about what antibiotics are, how they should be used, and why they're important. So subscribe if you want to see that video. And also be sure to follow Squeakyville Productions on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And as always, if you enjoyed today's vlog and you want to see more videos like this one, then please support me on Patreon. Anyway, thanks for watching and see you on Thursday.